Since this paper has in part responded to recent return to aesthetic movements in literary studies, I'd like to end with a discussion of how considering the aesthetics of textual materiality might interface with trends in the profession. Bibliographic concerns, by which I mean concern with the physical components of texts, are historically more related to cultural studies than aesthetically orientated readings, despite their narrow concern with books. This association results from the fact that sociological approaches grouped under the history of the book, in particular, are primarily concerned with how material production, dissemination, and reception influence the forms and availability of textual commodities with specific production histories. To date, these approaches have been heavily influenced by historical analyses of quantitative, full-spectrum publishing economies. They tend to prefer broader social and technological narratives to the singular act of reading and related discussions of aesthetic experience. Literary analysis, on the other hand, has largely confined itself to methodologies favoring these singular reading encounters, despite perennial factionalizing over the merits of close versus particular reading. These latter methodologies, whatever differences they might espouse, usually rely on aesthetic readings for their interpretive work, even when these aesthetics are criticized for their latent political ideologies. As a result, there has been little pursuit of how material forms influence the aesthetic experience of literature. Although criticism has widely acknowledged communication between aesthetic categories and cultural and historical contexts, these contexts rarely extend to include the physical text at hand, and as a result, the role of these objects in producing specific aesthetic responses goes, I think, if popularly felt but critically unspoken is one way to put it. People can sort of intuitively feel that there is a difference in the reading experience that results from the uses of these different mediums, and it's not entirely related to an analytical shift. It's also a sensory shift. You get this a lot when people say, oh, you know, I can never use a Kindle because I need to feel the book in my hands or something along those lines. What they're really doing is talking about an aesthetic experience that's fulfilling aesthetic expectations that are reinforced and produced in part by the technologies through which they access the works which we're discussing. So thinking about literary aesthetics in terms of material expressiveness affords a vital link between the assumed sensuous nature of aesthetic experience as a product of reading and the intensely mediated social nature of textual commodities as products for reading. There's a pragmatic benefit to this approach, insofar as it refuses to pick one side or the other in the ongoing tensions between cultural studies and aesthetics, choosing instead to have its cake and eat it too on firmly empirical and bibliographical grounds. This paper ultimately hopes to develop some kind of interpretive imperative for considering the material embodiment of text, as a way of getting at some of the cumulative factors that generate aesthetic experiences. It's my belief that in an age of proliferating multimedia, we need to develop a critical vocabulary for discussing how the sheer variety of material forms plays into aesthetic judgments, both now and in the past. It's applicable historically as well. Moving a literary work from its original periodical context to limited edition codex, to an anthology, to now an e-text, and finally to digital images of its original periodical self in the space of an online archive, cannot occur in the absence of fluctuating aesthetic effects. Pursuing this line of thinking does not deny or discount the validity of aesthetic experience, but neither does it ignore the fact that the act of reading requires some form of text, within or on the surface of which literary structures must cohabitate with a wide range of social expectations and material residues. Put briefly, reading's up to the task of addressing fundamental questions about aesthetic experience raised by our current multimodal moment will require some discussion of textual materiality and how the physical form of books acts as a prime agent in the mediation between individual aesthetic reception and wider social contexts. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate the opportunity to participate in this event, and I do apologize to any of the critics cited in this work if I mispronounced their names. Their work has been very influential, and again, I would like to thank you all for listening. Goodbye.